You're listening to Remotely We Are One, a podcast to help inspire others to take their lives back from the office commute. I'm Rick, a passionate beer rep who loves the industry but hates the commute.
And I'm Kaleem, a remote work advocate and consultant. We're going to speak with some of the top professionals who have managed to avoid the commute as they share stories from the most inspiring to the most comical, all while working remotely.
Man, this sounds exciting. Let's clock in.
So, what about the purple hair? Can we talk about the purple hair for a moment? When did you start liking purple? When did you decide that purple was going to be your hair color? And how many different comments have you received about your purple hair?
I have received an infinite number of comments about my purple hair. I have always loved the color purple. It wasn't necessarily my favorite color or anything. Mm-hmm. I randomly picked it on a whim. I was going to have purple hair for 2 or 3 months, and that was 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I keep telling myself at some point I'll get rid of it, but I don't know when that will be because I still love it. And it's also like my thing. I can always find myself in photos. If I'm out with a group in a busy place, they just look for purple hair. It's got some advantages.
That's cool.
Are you a fan of songs that have purple in it, like Purple Rain?
I mean, who isn't a fan of Purple Rain? But
that's good.
Yeah. But yes, I would say in general, big fan of purple.
Welcome back, everybody, to Remotely We Are One. I am Rick, your humble host, joined as always by my esteemed colleague, Kaleem Clarkson. Hey, Kaleem.
What's up, everyone? I love the word esteemed. I feel so special and important.
That's because you are. You've got the shine.
So earlier we were just talking about on the video, I have this shine on my face like I put too much lotion on. And for all you white people who don't understand what I'm talking about, we have to put lotion on every day not to be ashy. No one wants to see an ashy black man on video. It's awful.
Ashy Larry.
Ashy.
That was a Chappelle Show reference, folks, in case you were wondering.
Yes, Ashy Larry's, I'm rich, bitch. That's what you would say.
Yeah. We have an exciting guest with us today, don't we?
We do. I'm really excited to have our guest. I think I say that on every podcast. We're going to keep it going because I'm naturally excited about our guest.
It's true.
So, it is true. So, our guest, so many things that I could say about her. She has worked remotely from 30 different countries. Yep. And now calls Mexico City home. So that's just cool right off the bat.
That's amazing.
Purple has always been her favorite color.
Nice.
Right? And now she has purple hair. She's known for having purple hair. Right now, if you're not watching on video, she's smiling because her hair is purple and it looks awesome. So she's also the VP of Operations for Tech Ladies. Shout out Tech Ladies. Awesome organization. Last but not least, she is the founder of Opsi, a community for operations professionals. And that's how I met her. It's great. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give Miss Caro Griffin a round of applause.
Woo woo! Thanks so much for having me, guys. Excited to chat with you about remote work and all the fun things.
It's great to see you, Caro. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
That was creepy, Kaleem. What was that all about?
I like to whisper really creepy.
Oh.
I mean, it is successfully creepy, so I'm creeped out.
The Little John song where he would be whispering, whisper. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's weird. Moving on.
Yeah. Okay.
Caro, thanks again for being here. I'm really excited to learn from you. I just have a couple of questions on my mind. Somebody with your experience in this industry, I always wonder, how did you get your start? What was your first experience with remote work?
So I think there are 2 parts to that question, and I'll try to be quick about it. But the first one is that I worked at an agency shortly out of college. It was a horrible environment. I hated it. I quit it very abruptly in very dramatic fashion. I feel like everyone gets like one of those in their career, and I got mine very early.
Can we hear about the dramatic fashion, though, before you tell your story? We need to hear.
We allow profanity?
Yes, absolutely. You can swear on this podcast. Shit, damn it.
Okay.
You're good to go. You're good to
Okay,
go.
the short version is that I was working at this agency and my job title changed 4 times in the 6 months that I worked there. And like core functions of my job changed. And it was just like people had ulcers and it was that kind of environment where it was like, this
Hmm.
is not, and this was like a tiny agency. Like it was not worth, nothing is ever worth that. But it was just like, it was a mess. And I had a panic attack once, like in the middle of this team meeting where the
Wow.
CEO pointed to me and she was like, we're going to make you a copywriter instead. And I was a project manager. And I just was having a panic attack in the middle of this conference room and
Hmm.
something came over me and I stood up and I was just like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing any of this. This is wild. You're crazy. And I'm done. And I walked out.
Good for you.
Wow.
Yeah, I may have called her a not so nice name on the way out. And I literally just did
Oh.
that thing where you like take your arm and you like slide all of your possessions off your desk into my backpack. And then people tried to come after me and I was just like, no, no. And I like promptly collapsed at the bus stop and was like, what did I just do? Like, I
Oh
have no
my
job
gosh.
missing. So that's actually my freelancer origin story.
Mhm.
That was
Unbelievable.
really my first experience working remotely, was trying to figure out how to be a freelancer and work remotely at the same time.
All I can see is I can see your purple hair moving as you're like sliding on. I'm done. And I haven't had a dramatic exit yet. I'm really disappointed in myself. I want to I want to tip a table over. I want to be in an office and be like, ah, I'm out of here.
Sometimes it's just very cathartic when it's like been building up, you know? Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
do that with every job, but I feel like some jobs warrant that behavior. And,
Well done. Kudos to you. I'm sorry. Get back on track. So that was the beginning of your remote work story, right?
yeah, that's really the only time I've ever worked in a real office, 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
I was a freelancer. That was the start of my freelance slash remote work journey. And I did that on and off for years. Then when I got my first, like, I would say like fully remote, like on a remote team job, it was 2015 or I guess 2014. And I found this role I was really excited about at a
Mm-hmm.
company called Skill Crush that I was really excited about. And actually, the fact that it was remote was kind of a downside. I was so excited about it that I was
Oh.
like, okay, I wish they had an office I could go to, but this is fine, I guess. Which is funny to me now because it would take so much to get me back into an office. And I don't actually know that there's anything that would get me back into an office. But yeah, so it was actually at the time, yeah, not a huge selling point. It was just an add on that
Hmm.
became, I didn't realize how much freedom and flexibility and how many doors that would open for me to be able to work and
Hmm.
travel in a way I never thought I would be able to, and to see the world at the same time as like to build these relationships and friendships with people from very different walks of life.
Wow. So, given your experience, and you lived in a lot of places, and I have no doubt that you've met a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds, what advice would you give to somebody like me who's in a traditional role and is looking to get into this industry? What advice would you give to people like that who love their industry but want more flexibility in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is becoming so common and such a like a prevalent like struggle right now of people who saw a glimpse of something during COVID and are now trying to figure out how to preserve some of that and maybe in a less stressful, traumatic global setting. I think the first thing that comes to mind is really that there's a difference between like flexibility and remote, and that there are so many shades of that and of what that looks like, you know. And so I work with a lot of hiring partners at tech ladies, and I'm constantly trying to gently correct people when they're like, it's a remote role. And I'm like, no, it's work from home. You can
Hmm.
work from home 2 days a week. I don't consider any role that requires you to be in the office a remote role. If you have days where you can work out of the office, and that is like a work from home friendly role. But I think that for a lot of people, that's ideal. I read a lot of surveys and stuff about what people want in terms of remote work
Mhm.
and hybrid work. And a lot of people want an office. They want an office a couple days a week, but they want that flexibility. And so I think it's really like not about trying to find like, I need a remote role, I need a flexible role, I need a hybrid role. It's what do you want your schedule to look like? And then what's realistic for your current company or your current industry, right? Like there are some industries where you are going to have to be more in person and face to face than others. But I still think that there are days where it's like, especially the days where it's like, cool, if I'm in a sales role, can I put all my appointments on 3 days and answer emails and take phone calls from home 2 days a week? Can some of these be done in video calls? I think it all starts with what do you want your schedule to look like and what do you want flexibility to do? Is it to travel and be in different places? Because that's very different than like, I want to pick my kids up from school. Maybe that's a 4 day work week, or just starting earlier so you can end earlier, you know, changing your schedule around. And I think that's the first step. And then talking to your current boss or potential employers about like how you can make that work. But there's just so many
Mhm.
options. And I think sometimes we try to put ourselves in our roles and our companies in these little buckets. When I think the best thing about remote work is that you can be really flexible with everyone if you have the structure for that.
Wow. That's a great response.
I love that little piece that you just added on the end there. If you have the structure for that.
Absolutely. You know that better than anybody.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings me to a little bit of a follow-up question of, you've been the VP of operations for Tech Ladies, which I'm sure there's a big initiative and a big reason why Tech Ladies was created, was to kind of more diversify the tech industry, because the tech
Yeah.
industry is not so diverse. It's trying
Yeah.
its best. So I would love to know, what are your thoughts on the impact remote work can have on inclusion and diversity?
I think it can have so much impact. I think remote work can have so much impact on the diversity and inclusion and belonging on your team. But I do think people treat it like a silver bullet, and I don't think it's that. And something I see right now is a lot of hiring managers, a lot of companies posting these remote roles, and then they're like US only, or like only these states, or only this time zone. And I'm like,
Right.
that's one step, but we got a long way to go, because I think we also secondarily really focus on, I think as a remote company industry or industry of remote teams, when we say diversity, it's become a buzzword for racial diversity and gender diversity. And it's so much more than that. I think something that I've found, I don't know if enjoyable or fulfilling, or like that I found really great, I guess, for
Mhm.
lack of a more nuanced term, about like the remote teams that I've worked on, is how inclusive they've been for particularly parents and mothers in particular, and also people with chronic illnesses who kick ass at their jobs and are such great team members and hires, but who need to take a nap for 30 minutes in the middle of the day when they like feel like a heart rhythmia coming up or something, and I think like that's not even like a sacrifice or a compromise.
Right.
That's totally fine. Half the time I won't even notice. So I think those types of things, like that's inclusion to me too. Also socioeconomic diversity, like brings, we say like having these kind of diverse teams brings so much more insight into the knowledge and the projects and the perspective that you can have as a team and the products that you're building. But I've just seen firsthand that like I grew up in a lower socioeconomic bracket, and I just remember once having a conversation with the other executives on my team about hiring interns, and like someone was like, just very offhanded, like didn't mean ill will by it, but was like, we can pay them in college credit. And I could just feel my hackles rising. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, but something we should consider is that students have to pay for college credit. So like when I was in school, there were so many great internships that I got and couldn't do because I couldn't afford the $1,500 course fees. I was willing to work for free, but couldn't also pay to work for free. And so I think that is a diversity of thought that I brought to that conversation. And I think those details are lost in like the bigger picture sometimes. So I would love that our teams to be less white, less men, but also these other things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm going to stick on the less white, less men.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to stick on that one, because there's a lot of danger in expanding the talks of diversity
You're totally right.
among economic status, and, oh yeah, we're plenty diverse. Our whole team is white, but we have people on this West Coast, and we have people in different social economic status. And so I can't not say what I'm saying, but I think for general or standard diversity and inclusion initiatives, I think that remote work is not a silver bullet, but it does offer a lot of opportunities. And I'm assuming in Tech Ladies, you're starting to see some of that as well, because now people who are looking to match with women in tech, the location is not necessarily a challenge. I believe Atlanta has more men per capita than women or something like that. So there's different cities where your population and your location is challenging. It makes it more difficult for your organization to become more diverse. I do agree with you, though. It's not a silver bullet. You still need to put in a lot of effort into going to those markets.
Like I definitely talk to companies and see companies on the internet posting jobs and stuff, and they're like, we would really encourage people of color and women to apply for these roles. But then I look at the roles and I'm like, really? Because you're requiring a bachelor's degree in computer science, and women make up something like 10% of computer science degrees. So that's not an inclusive role. Like, do you really want women to apply? I think that inclusion and belonging piece is so important. And it's like, cool, you want women to apply, but you don't have good parental leave, or like the Black people on your team don't feel included because they're all in entry level roles and they have no leadership to look up to that looks like them. There's so many of those things that you can't just check the box and move on. It's along the path for sure.
Yeah, I do agree with you too, though. There are other things that impact whether underserved populations are going to apply. I love that one tool. I can't remember the name of it, but you can run your job ads through the
Textio, I think is it's called.
Yes, Textio. I didn't want to say the
Mhm.
wrong one. And it can
Yeah.
tell you whether your language is too masculine or too like a bro culture type language.
Yeah. No ninjas. Okay.
No
No
ninjas. No,
wizards. No, like, yeah, none of that, please.
you know, I'll make this podcast a little more uncomfortable. Speaking of ninja, I was talking with someone about the job post and using ninjas all the time. And this is a prime example of why inclusion and diversity is important. So I said, just so you know, a lot of us in the Black community use ninja as a substitute for the N-word. So like, ninja,
Wow.
please, you don't know what you're talking about. This ninja over here doesn't know a damn thing,
See, and I
Wow.
didn't even know that. That's
exactly.
I had no
Yeah.
idea.
I'm
Yeah.
teaching all of you, and that's why we have this podcast. You got
Yeah.
to learn things.
Yeah.
So I just found that funny when I see job posts on there, like, we're looking for the best ninjas.
Oh my God.
Rick is shocked. He's shocked.
Talk about the all-time backfire.
Right. You're trying to be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them had absolutely no malicious intent when they used that term.
Absolutely.
And it's just like the ongoing, running gag.
But this is the perfect example of like different things mean different things to different people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Ashy Larry. Like, let's just bring this right back to Ashy Larry.
Right to the beginning,
Yeah.
full circle. Yeah. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Wow, that is so cool. Switching gears, Carol, real quick. I browsed your LinkedIn profile earlier.
Okay.
And in your bio, you had written something that really caught my attention, and I'm hoping that we can dive into it a little bit here if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
It said, "What got you started isn't what will take your business to the next level. That's where I come in."
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about your insight with that?
Yeah, I do fractional COO work, and just means that I work part-time for companies who are growing. And I found that I really like working with earlier stage companies who found product market fit and are trying to scale their processes and their teams. And in startups specifically, you hear a lot like, do the thing that doesn't scale. And then it's like, okay, but like, what happens when it's time to scale it? Like, eventually you need to scale it. If it works, great, but then you need to scale it. You need to make it more sustainable for you, for your team, all of those things. And so I do really believe that. And I think that's kind of my sweet spot. I think that there are people who find their groove with their business. They love it the way that it is, and they're not necessarily looking to change that. They're not looking to scale or to really grow beyond where they're at. And I think I don't want to shame those people. I think that that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like if you want something to change, like you have to change it. And I think usually that means that you can't keep doing the exact same things. You need to bring in more resources. You need to think about things differently. You need to revisit what are things that I can stop doing. Oftentimes I talk to people and I ask a bunch of follow-up questions and I'm like, why are you still doing that? What would happen if you stopped doing that? And they're like, oh, actually probably not a whole lot. And I'm like, cool, let's stop doing that. Let's outsource that thing. Let's automate it. Let's at least streamline it so that it's easier to do. Let's build a process around it so that you don't forget to do it. So that there's less, like the margin for error is smaller. And I think all of those like tools in the tool belt help you get to the next level, right?
Yeah. Well, what I love about it the most is that it almost seems like it's rooted in a kind of a personal development aesthetic. And I had to read it twice because immediately I thought of myself because I've been doing a lot of the same activity for a long time.
Yeah.
And I thought, what happened to me in the past is not going to define me tomorrow. It's not going to define me today. And I feel like that is so well entrenched in personal development, which is something that a lot of people kind of lose along the way, especially when they're home alone. They just kind of lose themselves in the process. And that can lead, isolation leads to, depression, and people deal with anxiety and that kind of thing. So the universality of that comment really stuck with me.
Carol, can you explain to our listeners, this is self-serving, of course.
Okay.
Can you explain to our listeners what fractional means? To me, I learned this term probably about 6 years ago, never even knew about it. The first thing I was introduced to it was a fractional CFO, Chief Financial Officer. Can you explain a little bit about what a fractional operations person is?
Yeah, it's really just a fancy word for part-time.
Okay.
So as a fractional C-suite like role, I think that really became in my perspective, like it became more well known for CTOs and CFOs, like you're talking about, because these smaller businesses couldn't necessarily afford those really high dollar salaries for someone full time, and that they didn't necessarily, that they could get by without full time, right? Maybe they had a bunch of great mid and senior engineers, but they needed someone to like look more at the architecture, like big picture stuff, and mentor those people. Same thing with the CFO. They needed some direction, but just couldn't afford them or didn't have the time. So I kind of adopted it because I saw other people who I would say do similar but different things in different parts of business, like of a business, use that kind of term, and it just felt more related to what I do, or like a better term, because I used to just say like senior operations leader, and I think people are like, "What is that? Like,
What is that?" Right.
I joke all the time, like if I've learned anything from starting a community for ops people, is that everyone has a different definition of what operations is. And I think they're all right most of the time. I think there's so few things that you couldn't make a good case for putting under operations. And so, but people know what a COO is. They know them as the person who like wears all the hats, gets all the things done, and pulls together experts, right? And like people who are smarter than them in various niche areas and pulls them in as needed. And I like wearing a lot of hats. I have an HR certification. I used to be a developer. I love poking around no-code tools. I could do a lot of different things. Leave me alone for a few hours with a spreadsheet. I'll whip your budget into shape. I like wearing all those hats, but I didn't feel like they were really captured by senior operations leader. And so I was like, I'm going to try fractional COO. And now I found that it does click easier for people, and it's also really intriguing to people where I talk to them and they're like, "Oh, tell me more. What is that?
Right. What is fractional?
Do I want one of those?"
Yeah, we provide fractional remote people operations as well.
There you go. Yeah.
The only addition that I would add to it is sometimes you need a position, and they could actually be full time. You could actually hire a fractional executive position full time, but the idea is that, like how we explain it, is in a perfect scenario, we're working with you for about 18 months, preparing you to hire ourselves out of a job. So therefore,
I do that
if you want a CHRO, but you just don't know where to go, it's much better to kind of get some things started. We always say, hey, hire a fractional people operations person at 5 employees. Build your framework, build your scalability first, then hire a full-time person, which isn't us, but we're helping you build that up to be able to scale the position, the role, the responsibilities, and then kind of take it from there. So,
because sometimes that role is different than what you're hiring me for now. Sometimes you end up hiring a full-time role looking for the skills and experience to do like a certain thing. But once that thing is done, you don't really need that as much. That specialty becomes a much smaller piece of the pie. And so I think you said hire yourselves out of a job. And that's something quite often where I'm like, let me get you started. Let me help you prioritize and figure out exactly what role you need. Because sometimes I have founders who are like, I think I want a chief of staff or a COO or a head of ops. I don't know. What's the difference? And I'm like, okay, let's talk about the difference between an executive assistant and a chief of staff, right? And I'll get you started.
So since we're on the subject of people operations, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that leaders in that realm are facing with remote work?
I think the biggest challenge I'm seeing in colleagues and hiring partners at Tech Ladies is really async work. How to work asynchronously. I dragged Kaleem into an Opsi meetup the other day and made him talk about this.
Shout out.
He did great. I think there are people who know that they're struggling with this, in terms like leaders who know that they're running out of calendar space, right? Or spending all day in meetings and just can't physically like fit any more of the meetings on their calendar and aren't having time for actual work anymore. But there's also people who explain problems to me, and I'm like, the solution for that is async work, even if they don't realize it. Because you can't scale your calendar in a way,
I love that, by the way. You can't scale your calendar. That should be your next value proposition on your website.
Okay, actually, I love that. I'm gonna go add that after by the time this is out. I can find it on there because it's so true. And it's like I've worked on teams where we do kind of an agile methodology, and we have sprint reviews and stuff. And I think there's value in those for certain teams. But I think really, if you don't keep a really close eye on it, it just spirals out of control, and you have 10 people in these meetings, and it's like, you know how much you just paid for that meeting, and not only actual salaries, but also lost time and context switching and all of these things. And it's like, and then there's so many, especially with the Great Resignation right now with hiring across the US in particular, I've never seen a hiring market like this. It's like really wild. Talent is so in demand, salaries are skyrocketing, and there's all these people who are like, I can't find an engineer, I can't find this role, and I like have looked everywhere, oh my god. And then I look at the role and it's like US only. I'm like, you've looked at one country, y'all, what are you doing? Especially someone who lives in Latin America and just sees the birth of talent here. And I'm like, and also we're in the same time zones, and you'll hold up your product roadmap for like 8 months because you can't find an engineer instead of paying Deal or Remote.com like $600 a month to employ like a Latin American developer. And I think a lot of that also ties back to asynchronous work. You're like, I need someone in my exact time zone who works the exact same hours as me, who's always available. And it's like, that's not what remote work is. And so I think these companies who have been remote for a long time used to be able to kind of trade on that. They were like, we're remote. And they would get a lot of great applicants because they were good companies, but they were remote. And that was the big selling point. And I've benefited from this in the past for sure as a hiring manager. And now there's a lot of remote roles. Like that's not the differentiator anymore. And so I think the next frontier is going to be asynchronous teams, where it's like, not only can you work remotely, but you can set your own schedule. You don't have to be chained to a computer. Like, you know how many meetings I've taken at 1 and 2 in the morning because my team was synchronous and I was in Asia?
I really love that answer because I feel like we kind of talked about it during our presentation, and don't let us forget about talking about Opsy. I need to ask that question because Opsy's super cool. I joined it, so we got to bring that up in a second. But the idea behind asynchronous communication, it's perfect. But if you don't have kind of an internal communication strategy, or I also like to call, this internal communications decision matrix, it doesn't help eliminate some of those questions. You have to establish like, hey, you're not going to get a response right away.
Yes.
Like right in the beginning, you're not going to get a response. So change your mentality when you send this message as far as like, where's my response? Because it's a different thing, right? It's completely different. So I really loved your comment about async. But moving on to Opsy, please tell us, what is Opsy? I know what it is, but I want you to tell the listeners, what is Opsy and what made you decide to create Opsy?
Opsi is a community of operations professionals who work in tech. So we've got people who do more general or business ops, people ops, HR, but also finance, legal, accounting, no code ops, marketing ops. I am discovering new titles every day, and I love it. And it really was born out of me wanting this to exist for myself.
Okay.
I started in an ops role kind of accidentally and grew into wearing different hats. And so much of what I learned was from Googling and talking to people who would talk to me about what they did and sharing advice. And which is why I'm so like free with my time in that way now, because I'm like, this is how we're all learning, right? Especially when you are thinking about remote teams and global teams. And it's like, there's no rule book for this in a lot of ways. And a lot of teams have started writing resources, but there's still a lot of unpaved territory. And so I really wanted a place where people like me who wear a lot of hats could find their people and learn from each other. And also really, I think my like secondary motivation, or like secret agenda, as I call it, is to really highlight this work. I think non-technical roles in tech, if anyone who works in tech knows how it is. You're kind of like the redheaded stepchild or like the Harry Potter under the stairs sometimes. And I'm like, I firmly believe that especially at a smaller early stage startup, that like a great operations hire can change the course of your business because they can just do what needs to be done when those priorities are constantly changing every other week. And so I really wanted to also, like with Opsy podcast, show off in particular the great work that some awesome ops people were doing, and really show like, this is what ops is. This is like, you're hiring someone with the ability to solve these problems that no one's solved before, or that you don't know how to solve, So that's why it exists. It's still pretty new, but I've been really excited to find that so many other people have had a very similar reaction where they're like, oh my God, I've been wanting this. I was going to start it myself. And I'm like, great. You want to help me? Let's do it.
I saw the post on LinkedIn. I was like, super cool. And guess what? What color is it branded?
It's purple.
Fantastic.
It's good. Check it out. It's called Opsy. We actually use people operations as a phrase instead of HR. We feel like human resources is a whole dated situation.
I would agree. I like that term better too.
So I just felt, what was great about the meetup is everyone was on time.
Oh my gosh, right? And we got so much done in 45 minutes. We did 3 lightning talks and like 3 rounds of speed networking in under 45 minutes. It was wonderful. I was like, these are my people.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you're bringing that up. I've loved your insights. I feel like we could talk about this all day long. But one thing I always want to ask people is, can you think of a memorable experience in your remote work that sticks with you, either was inspirational or even funny or embarrassing even?
Inappropriate could work. Anything could work. Anything could work.
Yeah. I have a few that immediately come to mind, and I think most of mine are really based around the weird places I have worked, because I've worked remotely in very different time zones with like a very synchronous team. And, so I've spent months in Asia, for example, taking meetings from bars. And at one point, because that's what's open, right? Co-working spaces aren't open at midnight. And if my Airbnb Wi-Fi wasn't good, or my short-term apartment or whatever, I was in a bar taking a meeting. And so there would be times where I'm in Japan standing outside of a standing bar with my phone that has Zoom propped up in a windowsill with a headphone cord, and I'm just remotely planning a video production in Canada from Japan. And I think there's a lot of those. And so over time, I actually had an employee who started taking screenshots, and she made a Google slide deck called Caro Working Remotely from Bars. And it was just all these screenshots of all these bars I worked from. And then even when it wasn't a bar, I guess a specific example I will give is that I was in Croatia working from a co-working space that was opened up to the beach. So no complaints. It was great. But I had one standing Friday meeting that was just a check-in with my executive team.
What was the weather like? Was it nice out?
Oh, it was super nice. This was August or September in Croatia. It was, lovely summer. And I had some friends, and they were like, we're going to go watch sunset on the beach. And I was like, well, I have this 15-minute check-in, but I can take it from my phone. That's fine. Because it was 6 p.m. Friday in Croatia time. So we walked over to the beach, and it's a pebble beach. So we took these inflatable floats over to so we didn't have to lay on the pebbles. So I'm just picture me in an inflatable donut on a beach trying to take the Zoom call from my phone. And I think the Zoom app had recently changed, and I just wasn't clear on the interface. And so we're drinking beers because, it's 6 p.m. on a Friday.
Of course,
on the
of course.
beach.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that, I think I swiped, or you, when you start talking, it unmuted me just in time to be like, Roto, do you want the rest of my beer? My donut is deflating.
My donut is deflating.
I think I was gonna get up and go get another thing or something, and I was, and the whole meeting stopped, and everyone just started cracking up laughing. And this was I loved this team; they were great.
Sounds like a yearbook quote.
It was lovely. It probably would have been if we had, it was just everyone started cracking up laughing. I was like, Carol, what is happening? Where are you? And so then I had to come clean, and I turned on my video, and I was like, hello from the beach and a donut that I'm falling off of,
Oh, wow.
I just envision in my mind what's so funny about that story is, trying to just sit up in an inflatable thing. I could just see myself going, moving around with the camera phone, trying to use my abs, which I don't have. I have one ab, by the way, just so everyone knows that.
I mean, one more than me.
It's in there somewhere, but I would be using my ab trying to keep myself up. That's so great. Good for you.
Yeah. No, totally reclined. And then, so that meeting in particular, because it was always kind of the casualty of I can take it on my phone, it'll be fine. It's just a check-in. That particular group of people saw me, lost on a random road in Prague where I got lost in that countryside, so it was just, and I think that's obviously what I use my flexibility for remotely, but I think it's great that I honestly could do that, and I loved it. But I think it's also not just the fun things that it's the fact that in the same meeting were people who could take the same calls from the car in the carpool lane, picking up their kids. I think people can really decide what they want to use it for, whether that's drinking a beer on a Croatian beach or going to the doctor,
Yeah. Caro, we obviously know where to find you, but where can our listeners go to your website, your social media profile? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so if you do anything remotely Opsy and tech, I would love to have you as part of the Opsy community. The website is just opsy.work. And then I'm Caroline Syrup on most of the internet. I'm most active on Twitter, but I'm on LinkedIn as well. And that's just Caroline Syrup.
Caro Griffin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Remotely We Are One podcast. Visit us at remotely1.com/podcast for upcoming episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our episodes on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, don't forget to clock out.